Manhattan history, from Lenape trails to colonial shadows. Long before towering skyscrapers pierced the skyline, Manhattan's history began with the Lenape people, who called this island home. The land, known as part of Lenape, was alive with the traditions of the Munsee, Lenape, and Wappinger tribes. Hidden among its forests and shores were settlements such as Sappahannock, Nectank, and Conandicong, connected by winding trails that would one day shape the streets of modern Manhattan. The island's Central Path, a sacred route running from today's Inwood in the north to the southern tip at Battery Park, would eventually transform into the world-famous Broadway. For the Lenape, Manhattan was more than land. It was a network of life, where fishing, planting, and spiritual connection thrived along the riverbanks. Then came the tide of European exploration, altering Manhattan's destiny forever. In April 1524, Florentine navigator Giovanni da Verrazzano, sailing under the French flag of Francis I, became the first recorded European to set eyes on these shores. As he passed through the waters now known as the Narrows, he named the surrounding lands New England, a tribute to French king's family. The waters of Upper New York Bay shimmered under his gaze, and he christened them Bay of Santa Margarita, honoring Marguerite de Navarre, the king's sister. But the story deepened in 1609, when Henry Hudson, exploring on behalf of the Dutch East India Company, traced the edges of Manhattan Island. He recorded its existence and encountered its native inhabitants before venturing up the river that would bear his name. Manhattan was first etched into history as Mannahatta, inscribed in the logbook of Robert Jewett, an officer aboard Hudson's ship. By 1624, European influence tightened its grip. A Dutch fur trading post appeared on Governor's Island. And just a year later, the foundation of Fort Amsterdam rose on the southern tip of Manhattan. This fortification would become the heart of a new settlement, New Amsterdam, the cradle of what we now know as New York City. In 1647, the colony came under the rule of Peter Stuyvesant, the last Dutch Director General. The tides of power shifted again in 1664, when English forces seized New Netherland, renaming it New York in honor of the Duke of York and Albany. For a fleeting moment in 1673, the Dutch reclaimed their settlement, calling it New Orange, only to relinquish it permanently to England under the Treaty of Westminster, sealing Manhattan's colonial chapter. Manhattan history, the American Revolution. As the American Revolution ignited, Manhattan stood at the epicenter of the New York campaign, a relentless clash between the dream of independence and the might of the British Empire. The island's fate turned grim after the Battle of Fort Washington on November 16, 1776, when the Continental Army, battered and outnumbered, was forced to abandon Manhattan. Soon after, flames consumed the city in the Great Fire of New York, leaving charred ruins in its wake. Amid the ashes, Manhattan became the British military and political stronghold in North America, a shadowed city under occupation. The British hold would last until November 25, 1783, a date etched into Manhattan's history as Evacuation Day. On this day, George Washington returned triumphantly as the last British soldiers departed, marking the dawn of a new era. The air was heavy with the promise of freedom, but also with the scars of war. Between January 11, 1785 and 1789, New York City, still rebuilding from the ravages of war, rose to prominence as the fifth and final capital of the United States under the Articles of Confederation. The Continental Congress met in what was then New York City Hall, now remembered as Fraunces Tavern, a place where revolutionary ideals still whisper through the walls. When the Constitution of the United States was ratified, Manhattan's role deepened. From March 4, 1789 to August 12, 1790, Federal Hall served as the nation's first capital under the new government. Here, the Supreme Court held its first session, the Bill of Rights was forged and ratified, and the Northwest Ordinance laid the path for the birth of new states. Within those halls, the foundation of the American Republic was set in stone, while Manhattan watched, a silent witness to history's turning tide. Manhattan history, the 19th century. The 19th century transformed Manhattan from a colonial relic into the beating heart of America's ambition. Alexander Hamilton's vision as the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury set the stage, turning New York into a rising center of commerce and industry. By 1810, Manhattan's population surged past Philadelphia, making it the most populous city in the United States. The Commissioner's Plan of 1811 carved the island into its iconic grid, a bold blueprint that would shape the Manhattan we know today. Yet, it was the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825 that unleashed a true economic revolution. By cutting transportation costs by 90%, the canal connected Manhattan's Atlantic port to the boundless farmlands of the Midwest and Canada, cementing New York's role as a gateway to a new world of trade and power. As the city prospered, politics turned shadowy. Tammany Hall, a Democratic Party machine fueled by the growing Irish immigrant population, tightened its grip on Manhattan, culminating in the election of Fernando Wood as mayor in 1854. At the heart of the island, a different vision took shape. Central Park, a sweeping 840-acre oasis that opened its first sections in 1858, becoming the first landscape public park in an American city. But the era was far from peaceful. Manhattan's history during the Civil War was turbulent and divided. Though the city had deep economic ties to the South, tensions over conscription and fears among the working poor, who believed free black labor would threaten their livelihoods, boiled over into the New York draft riots of July 1863, a three-day wave of violence and destruction that remains one of the darkest moments in American civil unrest. After the war, Manhattan became a portal for hope and hardship alike. Waves of immigrants flooded the city, many arriving to the harbor with dreams of a new life. By 1886, the Statue of Liberty rose over the waters as both a beacon and a silent witness to the struggles that awaited newcomers in the crowded, gritty tenements of Manhattan. This influx of laborers and revolutionaries fueled social upheaval, with anarchists, unionists, and racketeers shaping the undercurrent of city life. The closing decades of the century brought monumental change. In 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge stretched across the East River, linking Manhattan to Brooklyn and symbolizing progress on an epic scale. Then, in 1898, a bold act of consolidation forged the city of Greater New York, with Manhattan becoming one of its 5 boroughs. The Bronx remained tethered to New York County until 1914, when it emerged as its own county, marking the final chapter of Manhattan's 19th century transformation. Manhattan history, the 20th century. The dawn of the 20th century brought Manhattan into an age of steel, ambition, and transformation. The opening of the New York City subway in 1904 bound the boroughs together like veins carrying lifeblood, while the Williamsburg Bridge 1903, Manhattan Bridge 1909, and Queensboro Bridge 1909 stretched across the rivers, forging a new interconnected metropolis. A cultural awakening soon followed. In the 1920s, the Great Migration brought waves of African Americans from the South, transforming Harlem into a cradle of art, music, and defiance during the Harlem Renaissance. At the same time, Manhattan's skyline began a fierce race for the heavens. The Woolworth Building, 1913, 40 Wall Street, 1930, the Chrysler Building, 1930, and the Empire State Building, 1931. Each claimed the title of the world's tallest building in rapid succession, symbols of a city obsessed with progress. Yet, beneath this rise, tragedy struck. On March 25, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire claimed 146 lives, most of them young immigrant women. Their deaths ignited a movement for labor rights, workplace safety, and women's liberation, as tens of thousands marched through Washington Square Park the following year, wearing the same blouses once sewn by the victims, garments that became symbols of resistance and reform. Even during the Great Depression, Manhattan's skyline refused to bow. The 1930s gifted the city a gallery of Art Deco masterpieces. The Empire State Building, Chrysler Building, and 30 Rockefeller Plaza, monuments to both audacity and survival. After World War II, prosperity returned, with vast housing developments like Stuyvesant Town, Peter Cooper Village rising in 1947 to accommodate returning veterans. In 1952, the United Nations headquarters opened on the East River, cementing Manhattan's role as a global stage for diplomacy. By the late 1960s, another revolution brewed in the streets. The Stonewall riots of June 28, 1969, in Greenwich Village, sparked the gay liberation movement, igniting the modern fight for LGBTQ rights. But the decades that followed were turbulent. The The 1970s brought industrial decline, financial crises, and surging crime rates. Times Square and 42nd Street, once alive with theaters and lights, descended into infamy, its peep shows and crime-ridden blocks earning the moniker the sleaziest block in America in 1981. The 1980s saw two very different Manhattans. One, reborn through Wall Street's explosive growth, reclaiming its title as a financial capital of the world. The other, gripped by the shadows of the AIDS crisis, with Greenwich Village at its tragic epicenter. By the 1990s, the city began to change again. Crime plummeted. Times Square underwent a dazzling transformation led by city initiatives and the Walt Disney Company, and Manhattan once again emerged as a hub for tourism, technology, and global culture. But the decade also bore the warning of darker times. On February 26, 1993, the World Trade Center bombing shattered the North Tower's underground garage, killing 6 and injuring over 1,000. It was, as the FBI later described, a deadly dress rehearsal for 9/11. Manhattan history, the 21st century, the dawn of the 21st century brought both tragedy and resilience to Manhattan. On September 11, 2001, the unthinkable happened. The Twin Towers of the original World Trade Center were struck by hijacked planes in a coordinated terrorist attack by Al-Qaeda. In mere hours, the iconic skyline was forever altered as the towers collapsed into clouds of dust and fire, devastating lower Manhattan. Of the 17,400 people inside, 2,606 lives were lost, alongside those on the aircraft, an event that left a scar on the soul of the city and the world. In the years that followed, Manhattan rebuilt itself from the ashes. The debate over how to honor the memory of 9/11 victims was fierce. Yet by 2014, One World Trade Center rose into the sky, standing 1,776 feet tall. To the tip of its spire, a deliberate symbol of strength and rebirth. Today, it remains the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, a testament to resilience, remembrance, and defiance. Manhattan continued to be a stage for global movements. On September 17, 2011, the streets of Lower Manhattan erupted as protesters gathered in Zuccotti Park for Occupy Wall Street. What began as a local call against economic inequality grew into a worldwide movement, echoing the borough's long tradition of rebellion and reform. But Manhattan's trials were not over. On October 29 to 30, 2012, Hurricane Sandy unleashed catastrophic flooding, a record storm surge, and fierce winds that plunged much of Lower Manhattan into darkness. Mass transit shut down, gasoline shortages sparked panic, and the city's vulnerabilities were laid bare. In the aftermath, discussions of seawalls, coastal defenses, and climate resilience became urgent as Manhattan faced an uncertain environmental future. Manhattan's history is more than just a timeline. It's a living story of endurance, transformation, and defiance. If you want to dive deeper into the untold stories of the world's most iconic cities, subscribe to History Love. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey through history's shadows. What moment in Manhattan's past fascinates you most? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.